It demands that we tell sinners the whole truth.
We will not go quietly into the night.
Voice of truth says this is for my glory.
Christian Cornerstone Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Christian Cornerstone Podcast, brought to you by yours truly, Mr. Bill Ricksecker, where we exist to equip the saints for the work of ministry and the building up of the body of Christ, according to Ephesians 4:12. Now, today we actually have a really exciting, really fun episode. I just got done recording it with this gentleman. His name is Michael White. He's the founder of a company called FisherPhilbrick, and you'll find out more about this throughout this episode. But we had a fun time recording this. I met this gentleman a few months ago, and it's through a little interaction. We shared a little bit in the past. He had an ad up online as far as what he was looking to bring some people on his episode, his podcast. And so after talking with him, getting to know him a little bit more, I was like, hey, why don't you go ahead and join us? Let's go ahead and create something together. So we did that, and that's what you guys are about to listen to. Had a really great time, and I encourage you guys to check out the links in the description below. We have his website, his ministry page, and the episode that we did together throughout through the episode we did together on his channel in the links of the description below. So I'd encourage you to check those out after listening to this episode. Had a fun time, and share what you guys think. Now let's get into the show. Okay, so Michael, me and you have known each other for a few months now, and I came on your show about a month ago. Well, I guess, yes, actually about a month ago it was, because the publishing was earlier in December, and here we are at the end. So for this audience that doesn't know you, who are you? You're Michael White. What's your story? Why are you here?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on the show. I think it's fun. This is actually my first podcast that I've been on, which I think you had mentioned too. Like, when you have your own podcast, you're talking, and then you're like, but I've never been on someone else's. So hooray, this is my first podcast I've been on after 2 years of podcasting. Yep. But I will go through it kind of quick, because I'll just say, kind of give you everything of who I am. But I am living in San Jose, California, which is the Bay Area, about 50 to 60 minutes south of San Francisco, for those that don't know California that well. But I grew up in a Christian family, became a Christian at 4, was baptized at the age of 10, and went through Christian school from K through 12th grade. Really enjoyed that. Gave a really good backing to who I would become, and just all the extracurricular that I got from going to a school where they have, a ton of sports. I did that along with singing, theater, musical theater. Just a lot of who I am today came from that. So that was really cool. I think a very impactful time with my Christian walk and faith was in high school. I'd been playing a season of water polo, and I had hurt my leg, not terribly, but enough where it would have been a pain for many weeks to come, because when you're playing 2 different practices a day and just like the intensity, it would have taken just forever. But I'd gone to a Christian club that the school had, which I know, ironic, right? A Christian school,
right?
Needing to have a Christian club. But I went there, and the speaker—
Are you allowed to have Christian clubs at these schools?
Yeah, at these ones. I know, yeah. The public schools in this area, they are trying to kick them out, and instead they want Satan clubs. So that's the crazy part. But the speaker prayed this prayer of healing over everyone, of I don't know if people need to be healed, but he just kind of did a general prayer. And then I had a Bible class, and then it was the end of the day. And by the end of that Bible class, my knee was completely healed, and I didn't feel anything. And I knew just from the injury, I'm like, this was not me. It wasn't an hour and a half. Oh, I just sat there in class, so I was healed. So that was kind of the first that I remember of man, this was a miracle. I was healed. And they're just whoa, how cool was that? And then kind of jumping forward, I would say 2020 was very impactful for, the world, America. But just for myself personally, of seeing, how do you actually be a Christian when the government closes all the churches? When they're saying, no, you cannot meet as a congregation to worship God. And, the Bay Area in itself was particularly crazy. And the church
you guys had it pretty bad there, didn't you? Over in California, they shut literally everything down.
Yeah, and even when they brought them back, they were saying you can't sing in church. You have to wear masks. You can't sing. And my older sister, had actually found a church that was open. during this whole time, which was like a huge thing of the county going after it. Right now, the county is still trying to get them, which is just like, come on, you guys, why? Like, what's going on?
About 2-3 years later.
Yeah, and so she and her husband started going there, and we're like, you guys need to come over. And that Easter was like 2 years ago, the first time like we had been going back to church, and there was in like 2021 it would have been. And it was so nice just to see people's faces smiling, young and old, and just people that were there wanting to, congregate together, to fellowship, to worship God, to hear from the word. And that was a big thing within the church and the pastor of saying, like, now more than ever, like, people need God. Like, they need to hear this. And they had so many stories of people who, like, they were coming from hours away because this was the only church open. So it was kind of like hit or miss when you meet someone new. You're like, I love you, let's be friends. Oh, yeah, I live like an hour away. I'm like, man, okay, we'll be church friends.
Yeah.
But that for me was a really big thing. And they really emphasized on a like 2-year Bible reading plan. And that's kind of what the pastor will pick out of. So from the last week of readings, he'll pick a passage and do an expository type of teaching, which I know you've talked about on the show. And even in our interview together, of where you have the word and then you're walking through it and you're not jumping around just to a topic that fits whatever you want it to be. And so
and there's quite a different types of expository preaching too. Like, I mean, myself, I'm more of a verse by verse by verse kind of guy, but I mean, you've got some titans. Like, the only one I personally know of is Charles Spurgeon, where he did an expository preaching, but his was literally like 1 or 2 verses, and we're gonna rip this thing into shreds and even look down to the DNA of this verse. There's only 3 words within this verse, but he turns that into an entire sermon. So, there's some leniency as far as that, as my preference goes.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever sat through that. That would be a very long hour and a half church service.
It's great, yeah.
But I know, like, with that church, really emphasized that. And at the time, I'd started reading the Bible from the beginning to the end. So people were like, are you on the plan with the church? I'm like, no, because I wanted to start like a normal book, start at Genesis, end in Revelation. And that was just reading a few chapters every day, like the really long ones.
This was at the beginning of your Christian faith journey, right? Or is this recently?
This was like in 2021, where I had read through like from start to finish, because I, going to Sunday school, knew the Bible really well, but I had never been able to say, like, when they asked in church, who has read the Bible all the way through?
Okay, yeah.
And I was like, I can't say I've done that, but I know where all the books are. I know the stories. I know what's in it. So I wanted kind of to add that to, like, yes, I've read through the Bible. And then now I am doing like the Bible reading plan, which it is really fun to see, like, oh, we read that this week and then we're going to talk about it. And we're going to start like a home fellowships in January. So that'll be another good way for people from the church to meet up. But from there, as far as working, because usually people want to know, like, what do you actually do? At least for guys, like, what's your career? Right out of college, I had worked at a startup where I was there for 5 years. I did their community management and customer service, kind of came in really early under a husband and wife co-founders, and got to really build up those 2 different areas. So as a very young, like 22, 23-year-old, it was a lot of fun, learned a ton, but it did not pay enough to survive in the world, even in California. So I had gotten a second job at Starbucks and was kind of just working myself to death for a year and a half, was as far as I could take it. I really enjoyed it. Like, it was fun getting up at like 4 a.m. and then doing this to that, to that, to that.
Hold on a minute. You're saying that you enjoyed getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning?
I enjoy working when no one else is. I feel like it gives an extra like productive boost, because I'm like, I'm making money while half of, most of the city is sleeping right now. And like, I needed something where I could work and not have it affect my other job. And I didn't know any other, like, I've heard stories when people are like, I worked 3 jobs. I'm like, how did you do that? Like, so I learned, I'm like, kind of you can, but then you sacrifice your sleep, your social life, your kind of even your family life, of just like, I have to work. I work from home, but I'm too busy. People are emailing me all the time. So that eventually I came to the conclusion of like, okay, I'm not moving forward with my like financial goals of getting married, get a house. Like, I can't do that. And I don't have any social life. So how would I even find a wife or make
Right.
friends.
Yeah.
So I kind of felt like God was telling me to leave the business. And so I left that in the summer of 2021, kept the Starbucks job, but then kind of felt like I knew I was going to start my own business at some point, but then kind of felt like, well, now's the time. In California at that time too, there were so many restrictions, and a lot of people at the church too went the opposite way of all the mandates and restrictions, and you need this many shots and this much mass and this much, like there was just so much piling up where I was like, all the jobs I would love to do, I actually don't qualify for any of them purely based on what they're expecting, as well as I have done event management. And that was something I was like, cool, I could get into that. But at this time, basically, we're headed back into a time where they could close down events again at any time. So all of my options were like, okay, what can I do? Well, I could do my own business. And that is what I ended up doing with a lot of prayer. And just like for those listening, if you've ever wanted to start a business, like, when do you know to do that? Like, you can't ask your
Right.
parents, you can't ask your friends, you can't, like, it's kind of a thing, like, you have to decide. But if you have God, you can ask him. And so
Yeah.
in that time, and like family and friends praying for me too, of like, what is he gonna do? You just are a barista now, a college education, and you're making coffee for people. I'm like, yeah. But I had kind of felt at that time he was telling me like, you're not going to work for other people again, like not in the sense of getting another full-time job, which I actually haven't seen come true until now, because I'd kept Starbucks, worked on what is now FisherPhilbrick, and that's kind of as I was going, wanted to start a coffee company, just trying to find a way to make a career and money for myself.
Right.
But then this past fall, Starbucks that I worked at ended up closing. So then I was faced with like, well, God, do you want me to work full time? Because if I do, I'm going to get a high paying job, and then I can, head to getting a house. I can do
Right.
all of the kind of worldly things that you kind of have to do a little bit of just to survive, like move out of my parents' house, get my own
Right.
place, like all of those. But after applying for so many, none of them panned out. I had an opportunity with a neighbor to work with him in his own business. That ended up not working. So kind of through all of these was seeing like, I think God is wanting me to do my own business, which I kind of knew, but that was and has been confirmation in these last couple months as I'm like on unemployment. And I'm like, you never want to say like, I'm getting money from the government. And then I didn't want to pay $300 to $400 for the healthcare that I had, because I don't even use it. And I'm like, do I even trust what they would want me to do? Probably not. So then I was going to do the government healthcare. And then they're like, you're too poor for that. So you need the Medi-Cal is what they call it. So it's just a very weird experience of like, it seems like I'm very poor, but I'm not, because I'm currently working on a lot of things. So that was just kind of what's been going on in the background of like, man, it's been crazy. And I hope, in the years to come, I'll be like, because I lost that job, I was able to fully focus in on FisherPhilbrick and then have it take off. And the business itself, if you didn't hear the episode with Bill, which you definitely should, because it was a great one.
Yeah, we'll be
But
sure to put that link in the description of this, just for those who haven't checked it out. I really enjoyed that one.
yeah, it was a good one. But basically, I started it just as a way to help small business owners start and build their own businesses. I had managed a lot of people that had their own small businesses at my previous job, like that was their on the side type of job, and just saw a lot of difficulties they had. And then when I was coming to like, what can I do for myself? I learned I did a lot of theater, so I like talking. I like being in front of a camera, the bright lights. I loved from Starbucks, anytime a customer said, I have my own business, I'm like, cool, what is it? Tell me, what's the name? Where can I find it? How did you know to start this? What did you do? Like all these questions. I'm like, that's something I could talk about. And people had always, maybe with you too, they're like, you should start a podcast. I could see you doing a podcast. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that's nice for you to say that, but there's a lot more than just you should start a podcast, which both of us are learning, like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, there's quite a bit. I mean, we've tossed around some ideas ourselves as far as, you share an idea, say, Bill, you can do these things. And, I myself is like, hey, Michael, what about these things? And I think we both, I think it's all beneficial. I think you're coming from the mindset of how you're operating, or your vision for fish, I can't even say it right now, FisherPhilbrick. And then myself, doing the same thing. But it seems to me, as far as the style, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. It seems to me that the style, as far as what you're planning to do with FisherPhilbrick is a similar style to what CC412 is. Am I correct? It's like podcast, and then we're going to have, some sort of development resources to help. I would probably say not necessarily general, but yours is we want to equip you to start your business, while mine would be similar. We want to equip you to go into ministry or to start your ministry. Is that kind of a similar theme, or?
Yeah, I would say it is. And even recently, when just through the people I've had on the show, I love when people say they never thought they were going to be a business owner. And then here they are on a podcast, like, I have my own business. And kind of as I've talked to more and more people, it turns out like so many people have ideas for businesses. And so I'm someone in life who, if I want to, I go out and get it. Like I figure out on YouTube, like problem solve. How can we do this? How can we work a full-time job and add this and do this just so we can get it? But a lot of people, they don't have that either they don't have it in them, or they can't see themselves doing it and they need the extra push. So that is kind of my hope, is like, it was just cheesy, but I'm building a new website of like, it's never like too early or too late to start a business, which maybe that'll get edited, but kind of, I'd love to eventually focus in on like, what can you do in high school as far as like getting yourself prepped for, like, I knew when I was a junior, I wanted to have a coffee shop and have my own business. So what could I provide younger Michael in high school of like, here's what you can do to prepare. Maybe you don't even have to go to college, which was like, growing up is like, you're going to college. Like, of course, that's what you do. And nowadays with society and culture, I'm like, do you really want to be indoctrinated by all of these college professors, the kids that you're going with? So I love that. But then also, like, I've had people on the show that are in their 40s, and I'm like, and they have kids and a family. And so I think it's just so cool to see that, like, you can go out against what is not what society would normally suggest, have your own business. And it's like, once you're successful, people are like, wow, you're awesome, you're great. But for these first few years, you're definitely going against the grain of like, I'm 29 and I'm still figuring out, in quotes, because I know internally what I'm doing. But to anyone else, they're like, oh, you're not married yet, you don't have kids, you don't have a house of your own, you're still living at home, you're still you would pile that on. So that, I think, is always like an internal struggle, but I've grown up with that a lot because I wanted to do a lot of performing and singing, songwriting, and that's another, cute, you want to be a singer, you want to perform. And so I think I've grown up knowing that, so that has been helpful. But
I think that I think all that what I really like about that, and it seems to me like you're kind of on this page, is society is telling you you've got to check these boxes before you accomplish this task. And I think about that too. At least this is somewhat, to a degree, still is. But originally, when I first began this ministry project, was I was hearing all over. I was hearing both sides, but more predominantly, you're not qualified to some degree or another. You're not ready because you've got to check these boxes here and so on. And I still use that. I still get in that mindset because when I first began this, and it seems to me like you're in the same position or a similar position anyways, is that you're not letting the outside criticism stop you from doing what you're wanting to do. Like what I think about Timothy, now he obviously had some preparation work. He was equipped by Paul, and then Paul, through his apostolic authority, says, Timothy, you're ready. You're even more qualified than these guys. But I kind of use that as my fuel. Like when I first started this project, I'm getting this, you're not ready, you're not qualified, you need to go through these things. And at that time, I was in the mindset of, I'm going to prove you wrong, or watch me. I don't even know if we're supposed to be saying this on a Christian podcast. You got the American cliche here, hold my beer. These things, it just... that's what I use for my fuel. And even today, I still get those. I was talking to a gentleman a week or two ago, I think is what it was, and wasn't discouraging me or anything. He just says, like, hey, you're going to run into this opposition where people are going to say, is like, well, you don't have X amount of experience. And, when I think of that, and he's right. You will run into those people. But when I think about that, I was like, okay, when I run into those people, I'm going to think of Timothy, because he was approximately in his young 30s, give or take, we don't have an exact number. And then by contrast to the social standard of an elder of a church, older 30s and 40s is the acceptable age, so to speak. So by comparison, he was fresh out of high school, fresh out of college, and he's being told by Paul that he's more qualified than these guys who are in their 40s and 50s. So, I mean, I think that's a really good mindset to say is like, okay, well, the society says I have to do it this way, but I'm going to say no, and I'm going to do it anyways. So I think that's a really good way to go with it. Like I said, there are some things in which we should be qualified for. Certain things we do need to prep for, of course. And I mean, I'm sure you can name off some of your own that come into play. But overall, I wouldn't say we should take that standard as I haven't checked these boxes off, so I'm not even going to bother with anything just yet.
I also, encouragement for myself that I have been telling myself, not recently, but just as you were talking, is this idea for those listening to, is like, if everyone told everyone not to do it, like that's a bad idea, where would we be? We wouldn't have America. Like all of these people that stood out and were like, I'm gonna have a car company and like we'll create the first cars for America and like electricity and like all of this that has just blossomed from America. Like they too had people that were like, you're a fool, why would you do this?
Right.
So I always kind of take that as like well, you can't listen to all of that either, because how do you know like if it could work or not unless you try? And I had a coffee company I started and I ended up closing it just within a year because like right now the time isn't right, but that was something like I got to do, and I'm like, cool, I learned a lot from that. Like it looks pretty bad that it didn't even last a year, but I think that is always encouraging to think too of like, if everyone just said no, like we couldn't be where we are. And then also thinking of like small business owners, like the little shop that you love to get food from that makes the best whatever the dish is, like that's a small business. And then you go through and you're like, man, there's a lot of people out there that had to go against the grain of society and be like, no, I want my own thing. So I think that is always like super encouraging.
Well, and even those failures that we come across, I mean, those are blessings too. Like I was just thinking as you were mentioning that, is I want to say Thomas Jefferson. I could be wrong on that, but I mean, there's a quote that goes around that, he's failed so many times. Like I failed 100 times or something like that, and then it wasn't until that 101 or however the specific quote goes that he succeeded. So I mean, it wasn't that he failed 100 times, but that he just found 100 ways of not doing it. And then that 101 or whatever the exact number is, I mean, voila, there it is. So, I mean, that's a journey too. I mean, even in these failures, it's okay, well, I did this wrong, I should have done it this way, and so on. I mean, even in that, I mean, that's still success, and in my book.
So. And I think a lot of people, and that's what I've gained from this too, that want to start businesses are afraid of failing or starting something new. And I actually think like it isn't that bad. Like if you're purely looking at it for what do other people think when they're looking, then maybe that is like, But if you're going to start something, you can't you can't focus only on that, because I'd always wondered too, when they, they'll throw out stats like most businesses can't make it past, a year, and then 5 to 7 years. If you've made it over 7 years, you will probably survive, which now with how the economy, inflation, all of that, like it's probably, so you need to survive like 20 years and then, okay, maybe. But what I realized is they don't say like, why did they close the business? Like mine was a very calculated, I don't want to pay the government $800 in January for a business that right now isn't going to work out. So like being logic and smart about it, like it's better to close it. So then I think I'm like, oh, there's a lot of people out there that maybe like I'm going with this other business I already started. So I'm still a business owner, but I just paused. Legally it closed, and I like to say it failed. I know one person in the small business community that we have is like, you should not say that. And I'm like, well, I don't think I'm a failure, but I think it's funny to say.
We might be thinking about the same person.
Yeah, and so I think that what you had just mentioned is that I can use that for the content. Like I'm writing an ebook right now that is going to be kind of in the process of, as you come through the business, of lessons from a failed business owner. Here's what I learned, and here's what I would suggest for you to start your own business, taking into account these things.
Right. Now, on that note, because one of these questions I have here lined up here you talked about, some things in which you've learned. So I wanted to throw that in there here within this past year. And this can be either personal or it can be professional in regards to your business. What is one of the things? I want to combine it. I guess is one of the most impactful moments this year in which you've learned from. Like, what is one of the things that you would take away? And I asked this because we're running into at the end of 20. Actually, I think we're on the last day. What is today? 29. How many days we got left? We got 2 days
31st,
left.
yeah.
All right, so this is going to be published on the 31st. So okay, we're on our last day. So what's one of the impactful things in which you've taken away from 2023?
I think personally, I'll do like personally, and then you had also mentioned in the prep work before of like your Christian faith.
Right.
But I think personally what I've seen is that it's okay to be where you are. Like, you have goals and dreams, and like I do want to get married, have a lot of kids. And when people are like, how many? I'm like, I don't know, but I want a lot of like at least maybe 3 or 4 would be
Energizer
cool.
Bunny.
And then we'll see what happens. But knowing that I'm not there yet, and then seeing, I have an older and younger sister. They're both married. My older one has 2 kids. My younger sister and her husband are looking to start buying a house. I'm like, that has been my dream, and I've been saving for so many years, and like I have a good amount saved, but it's still not enough. And
right.
kind of like,
especially in California, they're pretty expensive out there, aren't they?
Yes, it's so much. And so all of these things of like, I want to be there, and I can imagine myself being there, and it can be frustrating and annoying, and just like, God, why can't you make this happen a little faster? And even my friend, I hung out with him yesterday, was like, so when do you think you'll start making money with FisherPhilbrick? I'm like, I can't give you a definite, like within the next year. That's my goal. Yeah. But I think just looking at what I do have around me, and just the time spent with family of at the beginning of 2023, my sister had to go in the hospital for the baby that was coming, but she was bedridden. So we're like the caretakers for my niece for 9 weeks. So I became a father basically for the second half of the day. And, we really got to help each other out as a family, kind of everyone combined. And just seeing like the importance of having people around you. And like for me, I don't have a ton of friends. I usually have like 1 or 2, but it's really the family. So when people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, it's with my family. But just knowing like that in itself is a really big thing that not many people can say, that they have a loving family around them that can be there for them. So that's a better way for me to turn the focus on that, of like, even in the holiday, like every holiday, I'm like, if I had a wife, there would be an even number of us, but I don't. So I'm, at the end of the table, or if I was here and here, then this could happen. But kind of taking that out and being like, you're healthy, you're alive, you're in good shape. You have, there's a lot going forward, but just knowing that like the family, like right now we are still in the area. And even that is like kind of a fear. I'm like, oh, I hope one of them doesn't move away. And, so like knowing like right now things are good. Like, even if it's not where you want to be, but just knowing, I'm moving things forward.
Right.
And then, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think that's, one of the impactful things for myself as well, the family orientation. And things don't necessarily move as quick as we want them to. And I'm one to testify to that. I mean, I've envisioned this ministry project being at a certain phase by now, and it isn't, but, I personally still enjoy it. So, I mean, and that's why I continue doing this. It's a passion. I love it. As I shared on our episode that we did together, I do these things because that's one less thing that I'd have to check off my box in the future. So, I mean, it's really exciting for me. But like the family orientation, that actually hit me, I would say last year, I think is what it was, which I'll share more about the specific details. But there was a really hard time I was going through, and my family was like basically chained to me. In a good way. I mean, they were.
Yeah.
There was some stuff going on, and they were consistently saying, hey Bill, are you doing okay? Are things okay? And what do you need? And and so on, all these different things. And I've always loved my family. We've always looked out to each other. But I mean, the specific event that took place, I mean, it really brought a lot of value to me, and I was like, I am completely thankful. Completely blessed. I mean, none of my family's Christian, but even so, God still put them in my life, and I mean, I am completely, thankful that I have them there for that type of support. So, Go ahead. What's your other element that you wanted to share?
Oh yeah, in
which
regards to like the Christian faith and what I learned, I think the main thing was the like daily Bible reading and praying and knowing like that's something if you've grown up going to church, of course, you've been told that your whole life.
right,
But for some reason it's just hard to actually do. I don't, even knowing like in high school and college, oh, I should be doing this. I should be doing this. I should. And then I don't know what it took to do that, but in this past year doing that and seeing the impact of it and also having doing it with like my parents are both doing it like in the whole church. So I think that has really helped is like everyone is on the same page and then you can with spur each other on, urge each other on, like, and I'm
right,
pretty sure that's a, a verse within there, but the iron sharpens iron, and like we're there to like do this journey together. And so I think that has been really helpful. And then even in this, like just recently with all the false preachers and teachers and knowing that like we're at a good church, but my older sister was really good of like why she left and then we all left the previous church of just seeing things that didn't really line up with the Bible or how it should be, whether it's in regards to the teaching or the worship songs. And that's a big thing now, which you
right,
mentioned a little bit too, but just really kind of re-looking at like the different churches we've gone to and seeing like, whoa, the place we're at now is really great, but also it's like, man, why is that? And just kind of looking into that a lot deeper. And right now I'm reading an biography because he didn't write it. So someone's writing a life story of a guy named George Mueller who was born in the early 1800s, but he's a really like great man of God, had incredible faith of being a missionary and just opening up all these orphanages and not asking people for money, not taking a
yeah,
salary, and just being like, he's praying. And then eventually he got other people to help pray with him, but like not telling people would ask him, do you need help? Do you need money? And he's like, the Lord will provide, essentially.
yeah,
And so that, and just reading his story and seeing that, like when he started teaching, he thought he could just memorize a sermon of someone else, which that has an issue in itself, like the plagiarism, like taking
yeah,
someone else's, but that's how he thought he could learn to do it, but really seeing how it fell flat. But when he just brought a Bible up, opened it, and started teaching from the Word of God, then the Holy Spirit was able to guide him in the words he said and what was being impacted for those listening. And I was like, man, we knew this in the early 1800s,
right,
probably even before, like the pilgrims that came over and were breaking away and being like, we want to worship the God of the Bible and do all of that.
right,
So like we've known these things, but just seeing that and reading that, like as all of this is happening in society, in the world of people, deterring other people away. And it's like, do they know they're doing that? Do they not? Like, I don't know,
right,
but it's a big issue. And then seeing like, whoa, people, like there have been godly people that even when people are saying like, you're crazy, you're going to open another orphan house, like
yeah,
you have no money, and just like, whoa, that is so cool. So
yeah,
I think those are the big things. And then within the George Mueller story too, of just that God did provide for him. And I've seen that with my own family when we've gone kind of the end of the year to the beginning is like financially the hardest, and just having people that will give us like money to buy groceries. Or last year I got us on food stamps. I was like, what can I do to help? Like my tip money I'm using is running out. So just a lot of these things where you can see like God will provide for you. And he has like an even crazier story of that, of just going to God directly, which I think that's different than I've seen growing up and going to church. Is like you always, you tell your small group, you have all these people praying for you. But he was very strong with, he didn't want to be swayed by man. So like if you say you want to do, say, this Bible Institute, you're going to have people saying, you should do it. No, you shouldn't. You should, and
yeah,
it's knowing like you want to be sure that God is pushing you forward. So that has been something really cool I've seen just in reading about his life, where eventually he mentions he does let the moms of the houses, they have another name for it, but the person in charge at each house, who's kind of
is
like
it
the
the
mother.
matron? Is that the word we
Yeah.
want? Okay,
Yep. There you go. Bingo.
okay,
Like he let very little people on the staff know so that united together they could be praying for funds, so that they have crazy stories like they needed just a few cents and someone walks up and is like, I don't have a lot, here's this, and it was enough to buy bread to feed the kids. So just like that whole thing is like opening up like prayer and praying and just like, whoa, that's
right.
cool. Like
Yeah,
The
you're
God
gonna
of the
have
Bible
to.
is powerful.
You're gonna have to give me that book, or find it. I looked on Amazon the other day, actually a couple days ago, because I remembered the message you sent me, and I gotta say, so you were practically begging me to read the book.
Yes, every time I read it, I'm like, Bill needs to read this. He needs this book.
I did try to look it up on Amazon. I couldn't find one with the right cover. I did forget to ask you about this, but if you can, find it online of whatever it is, because I saw a couple different types. So I don't know if it's basically
This
what
one
you're
looks
reading
so
is what I
old.
want to read. Yeah.
So old.
So I didn't know which one to grab. So I was like, I'll just let him know about this, and have him pick it out for me, because I don't know which one I'm supposed to be grabbing.
For
But
the
I mean,
Bible
yeah,
verses, they do Roman numerals. So I'm looking, I'm like, I want to look this up, and I'm like, Michael, the X's and the I's
Hold on,
and the V's.
you got to learn the. I mean, I love Roman numerals.
Yeah,
Like,
I know them, but it
I've-
doesn't come like, I'm like, why couldn't you just put Psalm 34, not X, 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 I.
Yeah. Well, see, and I got years ago, it's technically a Gemini zodiac tattoo. Like, me and my sister, that's our zodiac sign. And I've never cared to follow it, never been interested in it. I just always thought it was kind of cool. Me and my sister are twins. We were born in June, which is the zodiac for Gemini, for twins. And, it just kind of all harmonized together. I was like, okay, well, that's cool. So she wanted to do something really cool together, which it didn't turn out to be together. She was actually in California as a nanny out there. And so she sent me a text or something. And, this time she's already got like 3 or 4 tattoos. But she's like, hey, Bill, when I come back home, let's get a tattoo together. So she comes back home. It's like, hey, sis, you want to go get the tattoo? Can't. I got to go to work. Or, she's volunteering at a place, make some money while she's taking a break. But, I got to go to work. I'm going to go hang out with my girlfriends, whatever it is. So the next time she comes around, hey, sis, do you want to go get a tattoo together? It's like, well, I can't. I got these things. I was like, you know what? Sis, you're on your own. I mean, I actually hit up my friend's, I was his girlfriend at the time. We're all close friends. He was at work, so he couldn't be bothered with it. But I hit her up, and I was like, hey, come with me. I'm going to go get this. But, yeah, so I've got a Roman numeral 2 on my arm.
So you can read them.
Yeah, well, yeah, not just because I got a little stamp on my arm, but, like, I've always been fascinated with it. The style. Roman numerals I've always loved for unknown reason. I think it's just kind of how they're written. So, for the most part, I mean, there's some I'm a little rusty with, but I mean, yeah, it's all been sort of fairly easy for me to identify. So
Nice.
Okay, so oh yeah, George Mueller. Wait, that's the one you said was all the Roman numerals are in there? Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah.
Or are you talking
some
about
of It's within the way the author who is writing
Okay.
about him
Okay.
has it.
All right, so here's a question. Number 5 here. For those of you who are listening here, I actually put a list together. But here's an interesting one. And I tried actually thinking about one. It's more of I would say probably a common issue, but I'm a little curious, if you have another one. What is one passage or doctrinal issue of Scripture that you personally struggle with, that you, I guess you would say, have a hard time harmonizing? Like you've grown up understanding the Christian faith, and it's not to say that what you're not able to harmonize it, or it's wrong or right, but just in general, what is? Yeah, I would just leave it at that. What's one that you've always found to be a challenge?
So when I was looking through that, I kind of went along the lines of doctrine. So like the commonly held beliefs that a church may have that you've grown up with or that you see.
Yeah.
And kind of 2 different things within that. So it's kind of just growing up and seeing that like churches, the staff, overall the people in the church, so that includes the congregation, they're either like completely condemning people for their sin, being very cold to them, they're going to hell, they're doing blank, blank, and blank, and it says in these verses, you're not to do that. And just like being so harsh to them. But then you look at Jesus, who, you should love your neighbor, and he hung out with sinners. And
Right.
people would ask him, I've just read it in the last couple of days, like, why are you hanging out with them? Why are you eating with them? And he's like, they need to be saved. Like, I'm here to save the world. And
Right.
so
I
that to
haven't
me,
come to save Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Continue.
Yeah, and then churches going the other way, where especially in California, you see the little fish and what's inside a rainbow. And
Yeah.
everyone is welcome. Whether you were born a boy, but now you're a girl, or whether you're just two guys, two girls, and then so it's almost the opposite. So either like so harsh, and I'm like, we're supposed to be loving people, like in general, and we're not here to judge and damn people into hell. Like we have God, Jesus, like we're not here to do that. But then seeing like everyone is welcome gets us to society where it is today, where like people don't even believe the Bible, but they say
Yeah.
they're a Christian and are going there. And that's like within Jesus's life of he loved the sinners, but he stood up for truth and he said things when they
Right.
needed to be said. And so I think like overall, to sum that up, of like Christians speak so harshly a lot of times about sin and sinners, but at the end of the day, like we're all sinners. We have all
Right.
fallen short of the glory of God, and like we're all damned to hell without Jesus coming to provide a way out of that. So I
Right.
think it kind of gets twisted around of people forgetting that, and then you get on like, what is this, the righteous high horse of like, look at us, look at us. And another book I had read recently, it was geared towards men, but it was saying like guys in particular are very prideful. And I was like, I'm not prideful. Oh wait, is that prideful? But that idea of, even if you are, like, I'm trying my best to do it, and I know you've mentioned too, but like any little thing, little sin would be enough to send you to hell. And
Right.
so that is like a really weird concept that I think a lot of churches gloss over. They don't really pound into, like, even if you have one bad thought, you lie a little white lie once, it's just like, sorry. So seeing your neighbors who are in a bad relationship or doing stuff they shouldn't, it's like, yeah, that's not biblically what they should be doing. So it's just kind of having a good balance of loving your neighbors of who they are and that they're in God's image and God's creation, but you're not loving what they're doing. And you're there
Right.
to kind of be the light in the darkness, where a lot of people during these past few years are like, we got to get out of California. It's awful. And at the church, they joke like, well, if everyone leaves, like what's going to happen? Like, who's going to
Right.
be there to be a good example? So it's kind of a long way of saying that. But I think just growing up in church, I've seen a lot of that, where as I've gotten older and I've learned different people's stories and have gone through experiences myself, I've will just hold my tongue because I'm like, that is not right. But also I can understand more on the human, like empathetic side of like people have their struggles and there's sin in the world. So it's gonna happen.
Right.
So that's just a lot of what I've seen, and I understand it a lot easier, but I still across a lot of people that are really like, bah, rah, or they're like, everyone, like let's look into gemstones and let's read those. I'm like, no, please,
Yeah.
those are not good.
Well, and I think that's really, I mean, yeah, I think that comes down with a pollution of what love is. I remember years ago, and it was a very impactful moment for me. I actually, well, which specifically came first in chronological order, I can't remember. But I remember praying at one time, and I've shared this a lot in a couple of the episodes that I've done, is that I prayed, and I prayed to God, and I told him, I was like, God, I am willing to reject everything that I grew up learning and know about Christianity. I'm willing to reject it 100%, if only you would teach me. And then, actually, I think I might have mentioned it in our recording that we did together. But, I mean, within that, I mean, that's really opened up the floodgates, because, I mean, it was very difficult for me to even read one page of the Bible, let alone, a comic book and everything. I mean, just reading in general was always difficult. But now it's just like, ooh, piece of candy. Ooh, piece of candy. Ooh,
And then
piece of
you
candy.
write books now too.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what?
So I mean, it's just kind of opened that up, and I mean, that's 100% God, because, throughout that growth period, I've really learned that a lot of what I used to believe was not biblical. So, I'm completely thankful for that. But within that concept, I actually remember praying this too. I had a conversation with an individual within my family years ago, given the whole cliche of, they said, the Bible's flawed, it's written by man, mankind's flawed, therefore you can't trust the Bible. But as long as I love others, I'm showing the love of God. So really the question comes down to that, is like, okay, well, how do you know it's the love of God when the very word of God you're pulling that from, according to your claim, is contradictory? But so, I mean, that really motivated me too, because I got in that mindset. It was one of the very first one of the first Greek words I learned, agape. And, there's 7 other different versions of the word love in Greek. But I asked the question of if God is love, and if the Word of God is a love letter to us believers, and that phrase itself, I actually heard that in a movie, and I was like, by golly, you're right. So if all of this was given to us out of love, what does love look like? And that I looked at, and I started reading the Bible in a completely different light. Like even the hardest things, like God judging people, bringing judgment on people, condemning them, however you'd want to look at it, destroying a nation, that's out of love too. It's a love for the purity of his creation, and it's a love for the law. It's a love for his own people, to provide a place. So I mean, by our humanistic standards, we would see that as being unloving, but then you'd have to take the other side of the coin. Okay, well, you going ahead and disciplining your child, or saying insert words here. I mean, that's all by the standard that you're trying to place on God. The very same thing that you're doing is not loving either. But I mean, I think and that's the challenge with humanity, is harmonizing biblical love, or especially within the Christian walk, we want to walk in love, and we want to emulate love. We want to emulate that of Jesus Christ, but we don't always do it right. So I mean, there is one side we come to it that we're coming off as Westboro Baptists with a picket sign, saying God hates you. But then at the other side, we could be too soft and just completely welcome everybody in, such as the progressive liberal movement does.
It's whoever's out there. There's someone higher up there. As soon as you hear that, you're like, stay away.
Yeah, and it really does make me cringe, because it's like, okay, you're professing love, but I don't think you really understand what love does. Love corrects, love rebukes, love trains us in righteousness, and I mean, love even tells us things that we don't want to hear sometimes. And like you said, I mean, this is something Jesus Christ did. And, to those who are critical, the Pharisees, he was critical to them. Those who were gentle and, like children, help me, I don't know what I'm doing these things wrong, woe is me. Those types of people he was also gentle to. So, I mean, it's not always perfect, but I think that's really a struggle humanity deals with, is trying to balance the perfection of love, or the standard of love, I would say. And, even the most righteous believer, I think, would struggle with that at some times. But, for me, as far as the doctrinal point, and this is kind of leading into that next piece there that I had for you, but I would say, for me, the doctrinal thing, and I'm never going to have an answer for this. I would say that it would be the issue of salvation. If you listen to some of the episodes, and I've talked about these things, is salvation itself is 100% God, but at the same time, humanity has the responsibility to respond to that. Now, I'm a man that believes 100% predestination, doctrine of election. Why? Because it's in the Bible. I believe that I'm saved because God saved me. Why? Because it's in the Bible. I believe that I've loved God because he first loved me. Why? Because it's in the Bible. So everything that I do, my entire response to God is because he first responded to me. But at the same time, and this is where something I don't think anybody is going to be able to harmonize. You've got what I call, the theological titans, modern day R.C. Sproul, John MacArthur, Steve Lawson. These guys can't even harmonize it. Paul Washer. Then you have guys like Charles Spurgeon. I don't know if I mentioned him in that list yet, but I mean, he wasn't even able to harmonize it. All throughout history, there's this response that God is the reason why we're saved, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to respond to him. So from the Arminian side, they do have some sort of degree of rightness. We are chosen. I wouldn't say because we've chosen. I want to be careful with that. But, I mean, we still have that responsibility to respond. So that's really a kind of a doctrine. The doctrine of salvation is really something that I've I want to harmonize, but I know it's going to be completely impossible for me to. But I mean, at the same time, I mean, I'm completely humbled by it too. It's like, this is a wonderful thing. I'm thankful that none of this happened on my own accord. And I think it really, I would say solidified, because I was a little uncomfortable with, I mean, I wasn't necessarily say uncomfortable with it, but I've always challenged myself to try to harmonize the two. But then, the last series we did over just kind of a drive-by of Galatians, that personally was like, you know what, I don't have to. I don't have to harmonize these things, because I know I'm not going to be able to. I'm just going to put my faith and trust in God and just let it be. It's like, if somebody says, you're saved because you repented and you believed, yeah, you're right. If somebody says, well, you're saved because Jesus Christ chose you, he plucked you out of the pits of hell, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's pretty much where I'm personally at. But that actually led to this last one, or not this last. We got a couple things here. We got a little bit of time. This last thing, and I threw this out to you. I shared this with you, and I want you to go first on this because I'm a little curious what you have. But that kind of leads into this next question, and I'm a little curious as far as what you have. What is something in the Bible you think I would not understand? And you said you had was it based on more of a trivia, so to speak? Is that what it was?
Yeah, so I wanted, at first, I was like going to go down this route of the verses about, and we've kind of talked offline about this in the past, of like when it talks about women covering their hair, only wearing dresses, all of that, and why do people still do it? But I was just like, what's something a little more exciting maybe? And then I remembered you're like, it's kind of like a trivia. So I always remember this one animal, but can you list, here's the question, 3 different animals that are recorded as talking in the Bible?
Ooh, three different animals talking as the Bible. Well, you have the serpent in Genesis.
Yep, so that's one.
I can't remember. I want to say Leviticus. It might be in Numbers. You've got the donkey of Boaz. No, not Boaz. Balak.
Balaam. Yeah.
There's a third animal in there.
This third one I didn't know until I was looking it up to.
Is it Porky Pig?
No.
Okay.
It's in Revelation.
Revelation. Okay, see, and that's where you're going to stump me because
there's so many weird things in there, right?
Yeah, and I haven't done a complete in-depth study of Revelation. So, what is it?
An eagle, and I have the verses for the. Well, I'll just read them so we'll start with the eagle in Revelation 8:13. It says, "As I watched, I heard an eagle that was flying in midair call out in a loud voice, 'Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth because of the trumpet blast about to be sounded by the other 3 angels.'" So it's in the trumpet blast of the angels, and then this bird comes in. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Watch out. But the donkey one, that when I was reading the Bible through fully, I was like, what? A donkey talks? Like, I knew the serpent, like that, you learn that like so little, like the serpent. And then even on different articles I was doing, they're like, it wasn't really an animal because it was possessed by the demon, like a form of Satan. I was like, okay, I'm just like basic barnyard animals that my niece could know. Like, she knows the snake, she knows the donkey, she knows a bird. Right. But the donkey one, I'll read that. It's from Numbers, so you're right. Numbers 22, 27 through 31. Because when I read this, I had to ask my siblings and parents, I'm like, did you know there's a talking donkey in the Bible? Like, you always think of Shrek and donkey, and I'm like,
donkey.
There, like, this has happened. Like, so starting in 27 of Numbers 22, when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam, and he was angry and beat it with his staff. Then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and it said to Balaam, "What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?" Balaam answered the donkey, "You have made a fool of me. If only I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now." The donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" "No," he said. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his sword drawn, and he bowed low and fell face down. So to me, that was like, there's a little more before, but that's kind of like a snapshot of, like, if you didn't know and you're listening, that there's a talking donkey, like, that to me is just so funny. And I'm like, man, you can find humor throughout the Bible too, of just like, this guy wants, like, he's not even fazed that his donkey can talk, and he's like, if I had a sword, I'd kill you right now, you know that? And he's like, well, just wait. And then God opens his eyes and he sees like these, I think before in the verse it says like these fiery angels with swords of like blocking his path. So literally the donkey's like, I can't go past that. And so to me, that is, maybe it's not something you wouldn't understand, but I just think it's funny of like, for those listening to, of trivia, of like, there's talking animals in the Bible. How cool.
Right.
It's not just Disney and DreamWorks and Pixar that fell into that.
Well, yeah, they stole the ideas from the Bible. It was done once. Yeah, and you know,
But I
one of
think
the things,
yours is going to be much harder, so we'll soften it with an easy one.
I think it might. So, and I actually had a comment on your Genesis thing. We'll save that for another time because we're running short here. But yeah, I do think it might. I don't think you're going to necessarily get this, and that's only because I only say this because, which we talked a little bit beforehand, is I didn't necessarily get this perception. Like I heard it originally from a pastor. He, gave his views on this verse. And I was like, wait a minute, could that be right? And so, I looked up the verse and I was like, well, okay. Well, I can't argue that. I mean, I'd have to agree with you. So, and I bring this up because I'll share my thoughts here in a minute. I don't want to give too many spoilers away. Okay, so according to Luke chapter 21, the widow's offering or the widow's mite. The widow with the 2 coins, however it's personally titled in your translation. What is this? What is the purpose of that, or what is the meaning of that?
It's when she gives all that she has, right?
Yes. What's the lesson that we should pull out of this?
I think, at least from growing up and reading it, and we just finished Luke in the reading that we had done, but a lot of it was talking about how people were trying to brag about what they were giving in their external works to, they're giving to look good, and not necessarily giving out of the right heart and frame of mind of you should be, a joyful giver. You should be giving a percentage back to God because he's given that to you in the first place. And so people would look at, say, the Pharisees being like, look at all this money I'm putting in, and people, wow, they're good. And then this haggardly, I think of like, there's so many homeless people where I live,
right?
So I think of one of them and I'm like, oh yeah, if you saw them walking up to like any sort of donation and they put in like 2 pennies or a few, you would be like, why are they doing that? Like, but at least in this story, that was like all she had, and kind of looking at the true heart behind her. And even in the George Mueller book, they talk about that too, of like similar stories of like this person who only has a little bit, but it was just enough, and that God can really use whatever you give him, is what
Right.
I think I kind of take from it too, is it's not about the money, but more about the heart of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because does God need your money? No. Like, if he's made the universes, he can make things happen. But
Right.
what is, because I feel like that is too simple.
Yes. And I'd have to say,
Too
I mean,
easy.
one, the lesson itself, I'll give you credit. I think the lesson itself is something that we can learn from. But one of the things and that's originally how I personally thought it was, saying the same thing. I don't have anything to say about that. However, when you look at the fuller context, and this is what I had to do, and when what I'm about to share with you was told me, I had to go back, read this, and I was like, well, okay, it's not talking about, the focus here isn't the woman giving all she has, and she had enough faith that she's going to put all this in. This is a passage in reference to judgment on the Pharisees and the elites. Now, I'm going to read this verse here, and then I'm for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of the surrounding context. Chapter 21 of Luke, verses 1 through 4. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting the gifts into the offering box. And then he saw a poor widow put in 2 copper coins. And he said, truly I tell you, the poor widow has put in more than all of them, for they have contributed out of their abundance, and she has out of her poverty all that she had to live on. And then I think in Mark 12, Jesus makes the point that either that or it's in the commentary, that she puts all she has, now she's going home to die. I could be wrong on that additional piece. But the point here is not that this poor woman has enough faith that she's putting in her last few dollars or last couple coins, which we'll say for the sake of time. But this passage has nothing to do with having enough faith or, even, anything like that. What this is a complete judgment against the Pharisees, against those who have all this money. She's being suckered in to, fulfill this law, I've got to put in so much money to the offering of the temple. And these Pharisees themselves, they're neglecting her. I mean, they're taking out of their wealth and putting this in, but the reality is, if they're really doing what they were supposed to be doing, they would be telling the widow, you keep your money, you keep those two mites there, because that's all you have. Instead, we're going to go ahead and take a portion out of this, either out of our own pocket or out of the temple tithe, however that might have looked, and we're going to support you. And this was a judgment against the Pharisees. The pastor in which I heard this from gave kind of the statement, it was like she's being suckered into the system kind of thing. Was she really? I don't know. I'm not going to argue that. But with what happens after that, Jesus foretelling the destruction of the temple, really goes to show that the passage itself is more of, you have failed to take care of my people. You have failed to do what I've asked. You've been given all of these things, and yet you waste them, or use them for selfish gain, whatever sort of statement you want to make there. But if you're really doing this, you'd be taking care of this woman. So I have a lot more I wanted to share on that, but that was just a little fun thing I wanted to share, because I always thought it was amazing. I'll share some more with you personally after the show, so you can kind of get more insight to what I'm trying to say there. But that was just my wow thing. It always has, always will be. And that's all I had on that. So
Yeah, I could see that. I think those listening could make sense of that too, because a lot of Jesus's time is saying, like, you circumcise your kids on the Sabbath on the eighth day as you're supposed to, even though it's Sabbath, but you don't want me to heal this man's hand and give him salvation, or
Right.
all these times, like, kind of showing them what they're doing, like, you're just following all these things, but, like, at the heart of it, do you know what you're doing?
Right.
And why are you doing this? And, like, he came there to save, and that, like, he had to tell them that so many times, of, like, showing them, people think you are like the gods of down here, like you're the holiest people, but
Right.
really, like, no, you're like some of the worst, which is, like, crazy to think too. And even when, I think even nowadays, when you look at even the politicians, which you would think in the prior times, like, these are the good people, the more you learn, you're like, oh my gosh, these people are not so great, and they've got a lot of sin, which we all do. But
Right.
yeah, I think that is funny. Like, throughout the Bible, you see Jesus just being like, okay, I know what you're thinking. And they're like, oh, what? You knew we were thinking these things? Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I've got a lot I wanted to say on that. That's a problem I think we have. You talk a lot, I talk a lot. So together, there's a lot of people that are probably going to be giants. Like, when are these guys going to shut up? But yeah, so we are actually running short on time. So I was a little curious. Do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share with the 25 million people who are listening to this episode?
Yeah, I would say, kind of closing it out, is that I'm excited to be able to work with you, Bill, here. I was excited to have you on the podcast, and as I mentioned in that episode, like, I had started listening to your show before we had talked, and so I knew, like, man, this would be so cool to have him on the show. And then we're still figuring out what exactly it looks like going into the future, but I think
Right.
it's still very, like, super exciting that we can just work together in this, of whatever that looks like, whatever God has planned. So I think that's something exciting. And then I would encourage those listening to start reading your Bible every day. Prioritize that. Pray right after, even because I've been getting up really early at around 4 to go to the gym, but I'll read the Bible, and then I turn off the radio while I drive the 15 minutes, and I can use that time to pray. Like, that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize, that it's a conversation with God, and it's supposed to be ongoing. Like, I think even for myself, I'll forget. I'll be walking the dog, I'm like, oh wait, hi God, hi, I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what I was thinking of, but I think that, but if you can start with reading the Bible and praying every day, that's like, you'll see huge changes, even just in your own life. And then finally, I would say, find a church that teaches from the Bible. Like, go through and see, like, when you go to Sunday church, and hopefully you're going to church. Some of these people on the dating apps I'm on, when it has a question like, what do you do on Sunday? If they don't put go to church, I'm like, skip. Like, come on, you guys,
Right.
like that should be your first thing. But I'm assuming people listening already go to church, but kind of look
Right.
through and see like what is going on within your church. Is it a healthy church? Are they teaching from the Bible? Make sure you're staying away, or like look into what are false teachers, what are worship songs that are going down the wrong path, because you'll see like, wow, there's a lot there, and you want to stay away from that. Which just
Right.
listen to Bill's podcast here, and you'll hear he talks about a lot of this already. So I would just encourage you though, like take those steps and actually go forward with putting this together in your own Christian walk.
Yeah, and on that note, I actually have a resource. I can't remember. I think I modified it from an original. I don't remember the exact source, but there is actually a short PDF that I've put together. I think I actually saw it online, and I asked the person that posted if I could, recreate it or something. But there's actually a PDF on our website on the resource page called Church Evaluation Worksheet. It's under the additional category on the resource page. And that's just a little checklist that I've didn't necessarily put the whole thing together, but that's just an example of if you're looking for a church, just something to look at as far as what's the focus of the church, of the worship service, and so on. So more on that in a later time, but yeah, I mean it's very helpful, very important for us to have a healthy biblical church. So that's just a resource that people can use if they're looking, for a church, just to make sure that they're on track. But and if you don't have a church, I know a church. Michael knows a church. So if you're in the Van Wert, California area, I can hook you up. So Michael, I appreciate this. I absolutely enjoyed this. If we could, I would love to stay on for another 30 minutes to an hour, chit-chatting about these things. Unfortunately, for the sake of time and our audience, which are probably having their ears fall off right now, we're going to have to cut this short. So I appreciate the time. Thank you. Had a lot of fun. And, I look forward into our next episode together.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, everybody, we want to welcome you, or thank you, I should say. We want to thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you had a fun time listening to this. The dialogue was great. Really loved having Michael on the show. And I want to wrap this up. We were talking about getting into the Word, the importance of getting into the Word, and Michael left off some very strong encouragement that it encourages us to dive into the Word. Now, wrapping up this new year, I wanted to let you all know, we'll have the links in the description below. What we're going to be starting off with in 2024 is, which we've shared in the past couple episodes, for those of you who are new to the show, we want to share this with you as well. Coming 2024, we're actually going to be getting into a devotional book, 52 Greatest Stories of the Bible, by Kenneth Boa and John Allen Turner. This is a book I've had on my shelf for quite a while. Haven't even gotten into it, so I wanted to get into it this year. We're going to dive into it, and if you want to follow along, the link to this booklet will actually be in the description below. And encourage you to get yourself a copy. Follow along. We won't be going through everything within the episode or within the book, but we'll just kind of go over an overview, some commentary. Use that to guide our 2024 episodes. So I'd encourage you to do that. And, we look forward to sharing some more with Michael, talking a little bit more and seeing what the Lord has in store for us. So without further ado, you guys have yourself a very wonderful new year, whatever we're going with, 2031, whatever we want to go with. 2031, we're not even there yet. 1231, I should say. But I hope you guys enjoy your New Year's. And until our next episode, you guys have yourself a very wonderful week. God bless.